I've got a note here on my lesson that says, talk about Paul McGuinty. And then I realized Paul is a dear friend of mine from Glasgow, Scotland. We've been friends for over 30 years. And I bit off more than I can chew when it just says talk about Paul. I think at one time in history he was the funniest man on the planet, and I would have put all my worldly possessions on that. He's had some quite adventures over life, and he's told me them in detail. There's one that stood with me. He and a group of brothers were in the Highlands of Scotland, and up there they have lochs. Here you would call it a lake. In Scotland it's a loch. Like Loch Lomond. Loch is what they call lakes. They were up at a loch, and I think there was a dozen of them or more. And out in the middle of the loch, there was a fishing boat, a rowboat that had been tied up. The boy. And they were in their early 20s. They all started challenging each other. I bet you can't swim out to the boat and back again. And of course, they're Scots, so they're good at kind of sticking it to each other, kind of grinding on one another. And eventually Paul said they got after me enough that I says, oh yeah, I'll do it. What he forgot to remember is the lochs up in Scotland run very deep, very deep, like Loch Ness, where they say the monster is. It goes down hundreds of feet. So that means that the water is extremely cold up there in the Highlands. So Paul told me, he says, I jumped in the water and I started swimming, and I'm a pretty strong swimmer. And he says I had pretty much no problem getting out to the boat. He says it was cold and I was freezing, but he said I got out there and I got on the boat, and then he says I started to shiver, and my whole body was just racked with shivering, and I started to feel kind of numb in my hands and my feet. He said, but they were all watching me from the shore. So he says, I knew I had to swim back. I couldn't be stuck on the boat. So he said, against my better judgment, he says, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I dove back into the loch again, and he started to swim back to the shore. He says, as I was swimming back, he said, my whole body started to seize up. And he described it in this way. He said, it got so difficult. It was like swimming through porridge. He says, I could not physically get through to the shore. He says, but I realized if I started to cry out for help, they would think I'm joking, because Paul's a comedian. So he thought, this is how I die. He said, I was convinced this is how I die. And then he prayed. He said, Father, I'm going to die here. Help me. And he said he got the strength to put one arm in front of the other, to kick his legs, to press on, to persevere. And he got to the shore. And he said, I crawled out of the water. He says, I could barely stand up. And all the guys said to him, so how was it? And he said, a piece of cake. He wasn't going to tell them. He wasn't going to tell them. Do you know it takes 3 minutes to drown? You suffocate. If you get into trouble in the water, 3 minutes and you're done. And this is the situation that the apostles were facing in Mark 4. They'd went out into across the Sea of Galilee. And it still happens. The storms come down fast on the Sea of Galilee, and they come in hard and rough. And this was a bad one. You know it was bad because these guys were professional fishermen. They'd been in rough weather on the Sea of Galilee before, but this was different. This was different. Now, of course, the professional fishermen, they're all going to do what they need to do, take sails down, rigging, whatever else they need to do, secure whatever's in the vessel. Matthew, the tax collector, he's melting down. Because Matthew doesn't go out onto the Sea of Galilee. Matthew waits for the guys to come in, count the fish, and pay Uncle Sam. So he's freaking out. You got Simon the Zealot in there. He's having a freak out too. You got people running around the boat. If there was lights on the boat, they've gone out by now because the waves are crashing over into the boat. So now it's pitch dark. Everybody is soaking wet and it's getting worse. You can see them looking at Peter, James, and John. They're the professional fishermen. When you look in their eyes and they're afraid, you know you've got trouble. And they're afraid. They're terrified. They know this boat is going down. They knew how much a boat could take. And they knew this boat could not take the beating that it was taking. And what do they have in front of them? What's their biggest fear? Drowning. Drowning. That's the biggest fear of the fishermen. And now they were facing it. Now, how did they end up in this situation? What idiot planned this trip at night across the Sea of Galilee? Well, we know that answer. Verse 36, it said, he said to them, let us cross to the other side. Jesus planned the trip. That's important for us to keep in mind. And now they're in the midst of a disaster. And where is the one who planned the trip? Where is the one who got them into this? Well, he's asleep in the back of the boat. While the boat is floundering, while it's filling up with water and going down, he's in the back and he's sleeping. So they go over to him. Jesus, carest not that we perish? Is that what they did? Is that what they did? They grabbed him. Lord, we're going down. We're all going to die. That's what they did. He woke up all right. He woke up. Carest not that we perish. And Jesus, when he wakes up, I'm sure he must have stood up. He had to have stood up. And he says to the winds and the waves, enough of that! Enough! And the winds and the waves go, yes, boss. Boom. Everything is like a tabletop. Everything goes calm. Nature hears the voice of its owner and gets into line when he speaks. And then Jesus asks them this question. And this is a brilliant question. Think about his question. Think about it. He asks them, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? Well, because drowning sucks, Lord. That's why I was afraid. Because water will kill you. Because suffocation is a horrible way to go. Because the kids wouldn't have any father. The wives would be widows. There is no social safety net that's going to pick up the slack if we're gone. That's why I was afraid. See, all of the physical senses of the disciples, their common sense, their drive for survival screamed to them that they were going down and that they were sinking. And that's why they were afraid. And you know what Jesus' answer to that? That's a rhetorical question. Why you were afraid? He said to them, you had nothing to be afraid of. What? What? We had nothing to be afraid of? He's like, oh yeah, you had nothing to be afraid of. Why? Because he was in the boat. He was in the boat. And that boat wasn't going down because he was in it. You ever feel like you're sinking in the storms of life? You ever get that feeling that my boat is going under? That this is turning from a boat into a submarine very quickly. You ever had that feeling? If you haven't, you will. If you're a Christian, you will. If you're not now, you're going to in the future. If you don't think you will, listen, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's coming. It's coming. You're going to be there. And why is that? Because Christ plans our life trip. He's the planner of it. And Christ is not afraid to take us to the edge of disaster. And he'll do it. He'll do it. Now, the religious charlatans, they come along and promise you your best life now if you follow Christ. Health, wealth, prosperity, go to church, be a good person, do your good works, and have a nice life. And where did all that nonsense come from? Well, it wasn't Jesus, and it's not Christianity. You want to find out if God will take you to the edge? Ask Paul. Ask Peter. Ask the apostles. Ask the first 10 generations of Christians, 300 years of Roman persecution. And not one of them had their best life now. Following Jesus Christ is not a steady, predictable, and orderly bed of roses. Following Christ is going to the edge of death and destruction. Jesus took his disciples on a near-death experience that night. And Christ isn't afraid to do that with us. He isn't afraid. He took them to the edge of disaster. Why is that? Why did he do this? Why put them in this situation? Well, they had greater work ahead of them to do, and they had to learn to trust him completely. Completely. Because they were going to face the might of the Roman Empire, and they were going to face persecution by the leadership of Israel. They were being called to change the world, and the only way to get it done was to trust him completely. They were going to face bigger dangers than drowning on that sea that night. They're going to face crucifixion, imprisonment, all kinds of persecution at the hands of their own people and the Romans. So they had to learn to trust him completely. Christ takes us to the edge of disaster and back again. Why would he do that? Why would he lead us into these situations? Well, to increase our trust in him. To decrease our trust in ourselves. In ourselves. The last person I want to trust in is me. I'm the most unreliable person I know. because I know me in detail. So Christ brings us into these situations that we trust, that we increase our trust in him and decrease our trust in ourselves or in anyone but him. But what's his goal in our learning to trust him? Well, we're here in this world every day to change the world. We've world-changing work ahead of us and bigger storms coming than we can imagine. So we are being trained to trust him for the bigger storms that are coming. But we got to remember this: he who is the Lord of the storm has planned the trip, and he has purpose and reason and a plan for it. He is with us in the storm. And yet at the end of the day, that's all that matters. That's all that mattered that night on the Sea of Galilee. And that's all that matters now that Christ is in the boat with us. Regardless if we have that feeling or that sinking feeling, he's here. Now, what should the disciples have done? A question to think about. This is my third point, and I'm going to wrap her up. What should the disciples have done when that boat was sinking? Well, they are disciples. A disciple models his life on the teacher, on the master. So what is the Christ doing when it looks like the boat is sinking? He's sleeping. So what should they have done? They should have got beside him and went to sleep as well. See, that's what you do when you're a disciple. You do what your master does. They should have laid down, move over, Jesus. He's hogging that pillow they had back there. Move over. I'm going to sleep with you. What do I do in the midst of the storms when it looks like Christ has fallen asleep at the wheel? What are we to do? We're to lie down and get some sleep. If it looks like he's sleeping, rest your head on your pillow because he's not worried. He's not afraid. Christ is not worried about the storm. Why should I be? Why should I be? Because this boat, our lives corporately in Christ, individually in Christ, who we are as disciples, this boat does not sink. It's not going to go under, regardless of what comes our way, because Christ is on board. Nothing sinks this ship because the master of all things is on it, and he's not afraid. He's not worried. He's not melting down. So I got to put my head down on my pillow and rest too. Where did melting down get the disciples? Where did it get them as they were freaking out in the storm? It got them nowhere. It did them no good. It did not change the situation that they were in one bit. The fretting and the fear got them nowhere. And where has it gotten us? How much has fretting or being afraid changed the situation that you're in? How much of the worry does 1 ounce of good? None of it does. None of it. Why live in terror? If everything's going to be all right anyway. Why live in terror if everything is going to be all right anyway? It's just a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. Christ is on board in our lives, and everything, regardless of how it seems, is going to be all right. I want to wrap it up with verse 41. Then it says, after he calmed the storm and asked them why they were afraid, it says they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? They're more afraid of him now than they were of the storm. And they should have been. They should have been. Because they were in the presence of the Lord of the universe. And how did Jesus respond to that fear? He didn't say, don't be afraid, guys. I'm your buddy. I'm your friend. I love you. Put the fear down. Didn't do any of that. Because they should have been afraid. Because he who rules over everything was with them. Christendom has taught us an unbelievably wicked generation that God is our friend. That God is our friend. It's like he's our chum or he's our buddy. And he just wants us to feel good in the midst of difficulties. We have a whole world going to hell, traveling down the road to hell because they believe this. Why do we expect the wicked to fear God when we spend time painting him as some kind of hippie in the sky who just wants to take all your problems away? We shouldn't be irrationally afraid of God as if he's out to get us. If he was out to get us, that's the end of you. But when you're in the middle of the storm, we need to realize there's someone bigger than the storm. Someone to be more afraid of than the storm and the troubles and the hardship that you're in. We've got our fear in the wrong place. I'm afraid of my life crumbling. I'm fearing the wrong thing. I have to fear God. Fear the Christ. Fear the Lord of the universe. My job is not to live in fear or terror of the storm, but to fear him who calms the storm. Christ takes his disciples to the edge of destruction. He takes us to the edge of disaster because there's a greater work ahead for us. No storm of life is going to destroy us because the Lord of the storm is in the boat with us. And when it looks like he's resting, we need to rest in him. Rest in him. This supper is an invisible or visible sign. This bread we're going to put our hands on here, this fruit of the vine that we're going to drink is a visible sign to you and I of an invisible reality. And the invisible reality is this: that Christ is risen from the dead. So don't fear the storm. Fear him who rules over the storm. And you'll not live your life in fear, because this bread and this fruit of the vine is a visible reality, or a visible sign of an invisible reality, that he who calms the storm is with us. Is with us. He's with us today. So we have nothing to be afraid of.